Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Oops. I'm just trying to get myself on to speaker view, but I can't quite manage that. Eric, can you put me on speaker view?
Yeah, I'm going to pin your image so that
Lovely.
the recording will show you big. But I hope you can see some of us as you're telling. Can you see any of us?
That's okay. Yes, I can.
Good.
Okay. So I'm using new equipment today, as you can probably guess. So I'm just working out how to use it. Thank you, Jennifer. I love that story. If you had met my Uncle Fred or my Uncle Tom, they would have got on so well with Auntie Lily. They would have got on so well, and they used to embarrass my mother something chronic. She was so much better bred than they were. And they did not have one single self-conscious bone in their body. And I am not a bit like them in any way, shape or form. My name is Cassandra Wye, and I have been a storyteller for 30 years. And I'm working on a project called We Share the Same Moon, which is an online project gathering together folk tales about the sun, the moon, and stars from all the 176 communities and cultures that currently live in the UK. And this is one of them, shared with me by my lovely friend, Fran Stallings, that comes all the way from Japan. I want you to imagine the mountains of ancient Japan. And in between the mountains, there is a road that winds down and down and down. Down through the foothills, down through the valleys, down through the fields, until it meets a crossroads. To the left is the sea, to the right is the road to the city. But if you go straight ahead and follow that road, you come to a cemetery. And by the edge of the cemetery, there is a house. And in that house, there once lived a young girl, so beautiful, so vital, so full of life. To her elderly, adoring parents, she was the hope of all their prayers and dreams. And time came for her to be married. And her parents longed to find someone who would love her and care for her as they had all their life. So they looked around them in the village, trying to decide who would be right. Someone who would care for her as much as they did. So they looked to a man who was good to his parents, who was good to his neighbors, who cared for all the community. And they thought to themselves, this man has so much care. He will be right for our daughter. And so they married him to her. And he came to live with her in that house at the edge of the cemetery. But the young, vital, loving wife, she found that her husband, so good, so kind, so caring to everyone else, was not to her. It seemed as if he had nothing left for her. And she grew to dread the sound of his footsteps as he came back to their house at sunset. She grew to dread the creak of the door, the grunt as he bent to take off his shoes and put on his sandals, the slap of the sandals, the leather against the wood, as he walked towards their room. The sound as he wheezed and sat down beside her, as he sipped his tea, the feel of his touch when he laid a hand against her. She found herself dreading. Her nerves began to fray. She knew that she could not bear to live with him no longer, but what could she do? And then One day, as she made her way to the village well, she overheard a conversation. A young girl, pale and distressed, clutching her stomach, saying, "Please, isn't there anyone who can help?" One of the old women looked at this young girl and said, "Yes, there is. If you go and walk up the road and into the mountains, at the foot of the 4th mountain, there is a house, and in that house is an old woman who can help you." And the young wife, as she walked past this conversation, she smiled to herself. And that night after she'd cooked a rich supper for her husband and plied him with drink, and while he snored and slept, she slipped out of bed, and in the dark of a moonless night, she turned and walked up the road and up the foothills and up into the mountains, 1, 2, 3, 4, until she came to the foot of the 4th mountain, and there was a house, and the door was somewhat open, and she could hear the sound of a loom shuttling to and fro, to and fro. She walked up to the door of the house and pushed it open. And the old woman at the loom looked up at her and said, "Are you sure? Are you sure that is what you want to do?" "Yes," she said. "Very well," said the old woman. "As you make your way home, when you walk back to the crossroads, take the road to the sea, and there you will find a mulberry tree with white mulberries on it. Mark that tree. And on the night of the next full moon, go back to that tree and pick the silk cocoons of the caterpillars there. And then wait and count the nights. And then on the night of the next full moon, you must take that thread and unravel those cocoons and you must spin it. And on the night of the next full moon, you must take that thread and you must weave it. And on the night of the next full moon, you must take that cloth and you must stitch and cut it into a kimono. And on the night of the next full moon, you must take that kimono and lay it down on the grass and let it be bleached by moonlight. And on the night of the next full moon, you must give it to your husband. Yes. The young woman smiled as she turned and walked down the mountains and through the foothills and down the valleys and through the fields until she came to the crossroads. She turned and walked towards the sea, and there she saw the mulberry tree with the white berries and the silkworms eating the leaves. And she waited and counted the nights until the night of the next full moon, when she went back and she picked all the silk cocoons. And then she waited till the night of the next full moon, when she took the silk cocoons and she unraveled the thread and spun it. And then on the night of the next full moon, she wove the thread. And on the night of the next full moon, she took the cloth and she cut and stitched and made a kimono. And on the night of the next full moon, she laid it out on the grass to be bleached by moonlight. But on the night of the next full moon, she waited for her husband to come home. She heard the creak of the door, the grunt of his knees as he bent and took off his shoes, the slap of his sandals as he walked towards the room, the creak of the door as he opened it. And she smiled and said, "Here, husband, see what I have made as a wedding gift for you." And her husband looked at the shimmering silver kimono. It was beautiful, but he was somewhat puzzled that it was the color of a burial garment, not one you would make for the living. But nevertheless, when she said, "Husband, try it on," he did. and he lifted up his arms so she could take the wrap and tie it around him. And he was somewhat puzzled to notice that when she folded the kimono over him, instead of folding it left over right, as you do for the living, she folded it right over left, as you do for the dead. And when she tied the last knot tight, his body sagged, his face grew dull, his eyes slack, and he turned and walked out of the room and was gone. But she did not know if he would come back again. And if he did, what would happen next? Would he tell everyone what she had done? By the night of the next full moon, she waited, and the next, and the next, and the next, and she could not bear it any longer. She had to know. So she went back up that road and up into the mountains until she came to the house, and she pushed open the door and said, "Tell me, please, how will I know that he is gone for good?" And the old woman smiled and said, "At the night of the next full moon, you must walk up to the crossroads and stand by the cemetery and wait." And so she did. On the night of the next full moon, she got out of bed and put on her clothes and slipped out of her house and walked through the cemetery until she came to the crossroads. And she looked. She looked up the road to the mountains, and she saw a figure walking down and down and down towards her. And as the figure came closer, she saw that its feet did not seem to touch the ground. And as the figure came closer, she realized it was her husband, but he cast no shadow upon the ground. And as her husband came up to her, he said, "When you tied the knot of the kimono around me, I did not know then that I would serve the god of death." And then, by the light of the full moon, he was gone.
Okay, thank you very much. So do I understand correctly that the wife was, she didn't like it that her husband didn't have any love or attention left for her, so she did this? Is that, am I understanding it?
Thank you for the question, Eric. One of the things I'm trying to do with the telling of it, as Fran knows, who came to listen, I have very much, it's a story from Hiroko Fujita, who I met at the same time as I met Fran in Singapore many years ago. And I'm trying to keep it as close to the translation. And one of the things I liked about the translation that Fran shared with me is that it's implicit. So you don't actually know why. So I'm trying to, various people, when I tell it, come up with different ideas, but I am trying to keep it implicit rather than make it too explicit. So it's up to you, to the visitor, to think what's going on there. Don't know if that worked.
In an earlier story we heard tonight, there was a character who could not cry. And it reminded me of those characters who cannot laugh. And in the case of this story, the husband could not love. So we're getting stories about characters who can't, who are disconnected from themselves.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously what she does is a terrible thing. I mean, she murders him, but she can't stand it. And I didn't miss something out, but what I didn't actually put in there, but I think I will the next time I tell it, is that there was no way she could get a divorce. So she had no choice but to stay with him, and she just couldn't stand it any longer. And I think it's an interesting one. What do we do in those situations which are unbearable? What do we do? And how do we help people who are in those unbearable situations to stop them murdering themselves or other people? It's interesting. I hadn't thought of this deliberately. I mean, it's just in the head. But I was once living in a situation in my own flat, but the flat above me was a very violent gentleman who was very violent to his wife, and he terrified the life out of me. And I could not get away from that. I heard every single thing. And it is truly, truly not a situation that I'd want to go back to. What do you do when you can't escape from something? How do you bear the unbearable? So I think probably that's why I like the story, because it's a terrible thing she does, but she tries to take control. Perhaps marriage guidance might be more preferable.
Can I say something?
Go for
I
it.
wanted to say, Cassandra, I was so afraid that he was going to come back and say, now he realizes how much he needs her, and that he was going to take her away with him into the underworld or the upper world or whatever. That I thought he was going to take some sort of revenge. And so I'm glad he didn't. But I have to say the repetition of the next full moon, or what was the sentence that you used?
The night of the next full moon, I think.
Night of the next full moon. It came out like a chant. It was like a song. It was so musical in your delivery that it was fascinating. It was hypnotic, is what it was. Yeah.
It's interesting because, again, that just came out through practicing it. It just decided that's the way. To me, it's almost like I have a friend who's a weaver. So there's something about how you weave the thread and weave the thread and weave, it's that almost hypnotic nature of it, if you're spinning or weaving. And so I wanted to have that in. It's almost like she's caught in this trap. She's doing it, but there isn't a way she can break out of it.
Cassandra, one thing that, is, so I don't know if you have read the story Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl.
No, sorry, which story is that?
Lamb to the Slaughter.
Oh,
so
wow.
It is basically of a wife in which, one day the husband returns and she's a very devoted wife, but he comes and tells, I want a divorce because I like somebody else. And in that spur of a moment, she doesn't think anything, and she is holding the lamb and she just strikes it on his head and he's dead. And then, it's the entire story is how she covers up the murder because he is, so you can always find it and read it up. But the point is that was, a spur of the moment thing. Yes. But this lady has actually planned, and every, the next full moon night, so what was going on inside her? Because obviously she would also have loved him before. And, every time, planning it, and every full moon night, she's doing something, going closer to that plan. So I am really intrigued about the thought process that she would be having, as the days were approaching to the final finale day, the D-Day.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's so many points at which you can turn away from what she's decided to do. And I one of the things often with stories, I'm very analytical and try and work out every single motivation. As an ex-psychologist, I'm very analytical, but with some stories I like to keep it open, and this is one where I think it benefits from that sort of almost, oh God, she really is going to go through with it, that sense of, and then as somebody else said, what's going to happen next? That whole thing, like when he's gone, it's like, oh God, is he going to come back? Oh God, and like the book you read, people make decisions and they don't realize the consequences down the line. And I think that's why it's such a chilling story, because there's so many points at which she can turn back from it, but she doesn't.
And I was hoping that when you were saying, I was thinking, okay, now she would stop, something would happen, she would stop. Now something would happen. And she went through with it completely. So.
Yeah, I think that the dreamlike rhythmical quality of the whole story, coupled with the mysterious old woman and thereby supernatural forces, this is, or it almost becomes inevitable. And it's not as if the woman, the wife, does not do diligence. I mean, she works hard within this dreamlike landscape and the moon and everything, to almost its inevitability. There is an inevitable quality. And I think the way you describe her loathing at the touch of someone, we've all had that. And it goes beyond the intellectual level to such a visceral level that I think we all get the need to rid oneself of that. And I think there's a lot of that going on in this story, which I love the way you told it. It was very hypnotic.
It's also interesting. I mean, again, it's I chose to do the story. Eric said, you know, the kind of theme, if you want it, is an important conversation, and it was just like, oh yes, because she overhears this conversation about the old woman. But it is also, again, without even planning it, within lockdown, there are a lot of people who are literally trapped in this situation, you know, and there's whole kinds of domestic violence, all kinds of things sparking up because people cannot get away from. And I just, again, you know, you just feel for people in that position, going, terrible things are happening and will happen over these lockdowns. But what is the alternative? How can we provide alternatives to people? So maybe this story will have its use as a way of training for people in maybe marriage guidance or something, or in dealing with trauma, that it's a way of saying, okay, at that point there, what could she have done differently? At that point there, what could she have done differently? At that point there, what could she have done differently? To try and get people to break that spell. I don't know, I'm making it up.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. I think it was a very mesmerizing story. And as you're saying, I think we can definitely, you know, look at it as it can be thrown to people on deciding what do you choose. It's a choice every time. The time is ticking on. So, and every relationship you hold on to, whether you want to hold on to it or you want to jump the gun or you want to sail the ship, it's a choice.
Yeah. It's interesting. I hadn't even thought of it like that. It's really lovely having the conversation because you're right. It's a choice. And it's like, what would you do? You know, like Cassandra said, this, the personal story experience of being trapped, literally living downstairs from somebody who I thought at one point was murdering the woman above. It's just what do you do? You know, and you do have lots of choices, but you don't have a chance to see them. So there's something in that, as you say, of using it as a way to get people to go, okay, stop. What would you choose? And getting people to break that mesmerizing, that hypnotic, and take a breath and stand back. It'd be interesting to do that because it has, because sometimes you do feel absolutely trapped by situations, and it's good to let people work away through them. Thank you.
One more question, Cassandra. It is just a Zoom question. I just wanted to know, have you purposefully set it in the portrait to tell the story, or is it just a...
I'd love to be that purposeful. No, I've just got my shiny new iPad, and when I was trying out at home, it was easier to see the camera and see the screen by being upright, but I didn't realize that in Zoom, you see, when I practiced it on Zoom at home, it didn't cut down. But what I was interested in doing when I realized the screen was short is try not to use my hands too much, because I use my hands a lot. So I actually wanted to keep that almost trapped in the headlights, where you can literally, in real life, especially if you're working by firelight or moonlight, you can really trap people in the headlights. You just use your eyes and you don't use your hands. So I was trying to use the constraints to see that. I'll have to look at the film to see if I managed it. But I think sometimes you just have to go with whatever technology throws up, so that so that if it happens again or something happens, you can go, okay.
Actually, it worked for this chilling story because you were completely into it and it was scary. So
it's what I just, so that one of the things I do, I'm actually often very close to the screen because I have such bad eyesight. Even if I'm back here, I can't quite see what's going on. So I like to be quite close. And I work a lot with children, and that benefits them because they can really see you. You give them your face. So, yeah, I haven't quite managed the long distance Zoom yet.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot to think about
Pleasure.
in that telling.